Hello and welcome to this class of Stream Religion for 7th and 8th graders. And we're continuing the story of Moses, through the eyes of the text, The Life and the Times of Moses by Jim Whiting. So this is the fourth lesson actually titled Into the Wilderness. So we're actually on chapter 4, Into the Wilderness. So the last time we looked at the Exodus. So Moses leads the people of Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery, out of bondage. God does this miracle of taking them through the Red Sea and defeating their enemies, the Egyptian army, with the chariots and everything. Okay, now you might think that's over. No, it's the beginning of yet another adventure, bringing them into the wilderness. This is where they are going to encounter God also in different ways. Okay, so through a lot of things that happen. Okay, the handing over of the 10 Commandments, for example. God gives them, if you like, these rules to guide them as a people. Take that as a way of looking at maybe the constitution of a nation. Constitution of a nation are these principles, okay, or rules that guide the people, that shape their imagination of how they relate to one another and anything within, themselves as a nation. That's very, very important, okay? So the 10 Commandments are given. Also in the wilderness, it's a dry place. It's a kind of a difficult place to live. Okay, so that's why the people of Israel always wanted to go back to Egypt. Sometimes they complained against Moses. They said, "Oh, in Egypt we had enough food there. We had cucumbers, we had onions, we had fish, we had lettuce, we had all these things. And you brought us into this wilderness where we don't have food." So sometimes they wanted even to kind of lynch and kill Moses. But Moses will cry to God, and then manna. Okay, manna is a kind of food that came down from heaven. So this group of people, I mean, it's estimated there were about 630,000 of them. That's a lot of people on the march. So God provided them miraculously this food called manna. Now, the name manna simply means, what is this? So they woke up and saw this food and said, what is this? Okay, and that's the name. Okay, God also kind of provided water for them in the desert. See, by Moses striking a rock, then water coming out. That was also another miracle. So many things happened to them in the desert that, if you like, shaped their relationship with God, and continued to reveal who God is to them. You might think that this is a story that happened thousands of years ago. It's in the Bible. Maybe it's an old myth and all that. It has nothing to do. It has everything to do with us. Because you can learn what we call a moral of a story, or there are literary truths that are revealed here. Okay, I'll just give you a typical example. That sometimes you're going through a very hard time, right? And you come through that and you think, oh, it's over. And then, bam, something strikes. Okay, for example, look at what we're going through. Nobody expected the school year to end this way. At the start of 2020, did you expect the school year to end this way, where there wouldn't even be a formal graduation? No, you never expected it. But here we are, dealing with a coronavirus pandemic. Came from nowhere. Now, this might be shaping your relationship with God, your relationship with everybody. Now we are all sheltering in, social distancing. You never expected me to be teaching you through this medium. But here we are. You see it? So this is it. So if you enter into this world, if you like, naive, that's what we call naivete. Okay, that's like you have no clue that there are difficulties in this world. You are in for big trouble because things are going to be thrown at you, and this is where we are in the wilderness. So please, let's continue to read, and you give me your comments, send me questions, things you don't understand. So we're on chapter 4 now. Let's begin. Into the wilderness. The most direct route from Egypt to Canaan, the promised land, would have been along the well-traveled road that lay along the Mediterranean coast. However, that route contained a number of outposts manned by Egyptian troops. The best way of being left alone would be to go somewhere where no one else wanted to go. According to most theories, after their victorious celebration, the Israelites turned south, eventually paralleling the eastern shoreline of the Gulf of Suez. This route put them in the desert in the Sinai Peninsula, which Thomas Cahill terms one of our planet's most desolate places. It would be hard to conjure up a landscape more likely to lead to death, a land bereft of all comfort, an earth of so few trees and plants that one may walk for hours without seeing a wisp of green, a place so dry that the uninitiated may die in no time, consumed by what seems like preternatural dehydration. The King James Version of the Bible makes the same point in one of its most memorable phrases. The Sinai Peninsula is a great and terrible wilderness. The terrible part soon became obvious to the Israelites. In Egypt, they may have been slaves, but at least they were relatively well-fed slaves. Now, they were free to suffer, some of them muttered. They complained that the drinking water at the first spring they found tasted bitter. Moses solved the problem by throwing a chunk of wood into the pool. Then they complained about the lack of food. In the morning, God provided manna from heaven. Manna was a sort of bread that would become a dietary staple. In the evening, God provided large flocks of quail. Then there was a double dose of trouble. First, there was no water. Moses struck a stone with his staff and fresh water gushed forth. No sooner had the Israelites' thirst been quenched than a strange tribe, the Amalekites, attacked them. An odd thing happened as Moses watched the seesaw battle from a nearby hilltop. When he held up his hands, the Israelites would gain the advantage. When he dropped them, the Amalekites took control. Things began looking bad when Moses, by then a relatively elderly man, got tired and couldn't hold up his hands any longer. His brother Aaron and another man found a nearby boulder, allowed Moses to sit on it, and stood beside him. Each man held up one of Moses' hands. The Israelites won. The most celebrated event through the Israelites' long sojourn in the wilderness happened soon afterward. Just 3 months after they entered the desert, Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. It was the same location in which he had seen the burning bush. So far, everything God had bestowed on the Israelites had been given freely. But now he wanted something in return, a covenant, a formal contract that obliged the Israelites to obey God's as yet undisclosed law, writes Jonathan as Kirch. On the appointed morning, a dense cloud enveloped the summit as thunder and lightning filled the skies. Moses ascended the mountain, then returned to the anxiously waiting Israelites. Surprisingly, there are different interpretations regarding exactly what Moses returned with to show them. The text of the 10 Commandments is not exactly the same in every version of the Bible, says Kirch. Even the numbering of the Ten Commandments is obscure. Jewish tradition starts counting with the phrase, I am the Lord, thy God. But Christian tradition regards, thou shalt have no other gods before me, as the first commandment. Some groups consider both of these together as the first commandment. According to the New International Version of the Bible, the Ten Commandments read in part as follows. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Exodus chapter 20, verse 2 through to 17. Many scholars believe that in the original Hebrew version, each of the Ten Commandments consisted of just a single word, such as no kill or no idols. In fact, a term that is often used to refer to the Ten Commandments is Decalogue, which literally means list of 10 words. Such a simple system would make it easy for people with almost no education to keep track of the commandments on their 10 fingers. Regardless of the variations, millions of people are familiar with the basic story of the Ten Commandments. What is not quite so familiar is that God didn't stop at 10 or 20 or 30 or even 100. God kept going, giving Moses a long list of rules and regulations that finally reached a total of 613. Now, this is very, very important that I stop here and kind of explain. So at the time of Jesus, when Jesus comes on the scene, there's about 613 what you call laws, commandments, or precepts of the law. How to keep the commandments, the basic 10 commandments. That's why you remember one lawyer went to Jesus and says, which is the greatest amongst the commandments? You remember that? And Jesus said, okay, tell me, which is the first commandment? And he says, you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, and strength. And what's the second? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said, this is the sum of all the commandments. Okay, so God gives the 10 basic commandments, right? But by the time of Jesus, it had grown to 613. That's what is being referred to here. So let's continue the reading. So as author Bruce Feiler writes, Moses repeats these laws commonly known as the Book of the Covenant because it amounts to a contract between God and the people, an expansion of the verbal agreement first reached between God and Abraham. To press the importance of these laws, Moses has the population agree to follow them by sprinkling bull's blood on the people, as he says, this is the blood of the covenant, which the Lord now makes with you concerning these commands. This was a significant moment in Israelite history. Feiler continues. Up to now, the Israelites have been largely passive, receiving the protection of God, being free from slavery, but promising little in return. Now they become active participants in the covenant, agreeing publicly to follow the dictates of God. Mount Sinai marks their birth as a spiritual nation, one committed not merely to conquering and holding power at all costs, but to do so within a strict moral framework. There was just one hitch in this process. God soon called Moses back up to the mountain. He spent 40 days there, wrapped in a cocoon of smoke that made him invisible to the Israelites waiting thousands of feet below. He received additional instructions on a number of subjects, such as the method of building the Ark of the Covenant and the way in which priests should dress. When God finished, he gave Moses a pair of stone tablets. Engraved on them were the Ten Commandments. Unfortunately, the Israelites proved to have little patience during Moses' extended absence, believing or perhaps fearing that Moses had abandoned them. They asked Aaron to provide them with a different God to worship. The accommodating Aaron told them to remove their golden earrings and melt them into the image of a golden calf, a familiar image in Egyptian religion. Back in their comfort zone, the Israelites enjoyed a lavish celebration. Outraged, God threatened to destroy them. Moses, halfway down, urged restraint. But when he got to the bottom and saw what had been going on, he became just as enraged and smashed the two tablets. He rushed over to the idol, threw it into the fire, ground up what was left, stirred it into water, and ordered the Israelites to drink it. Much worse, he called on his kinsmen, the Levites, who by then had become identified as the class of priests, to attack the crowd. They killed 3,000 of their fellows in a short time. After this bloody purge, Moses addressed the Israelites. He criticized them for sinning, but told them that he thought he could persuade God to forgive them. He went back up the mountain for another 40-day sojourn, during which he received a new set of stone tablets. On the way down, his face became so radiant, giving off beams of light, that no one could look directly on his face. He had to begin wearing a veil, lifting it only when he was in the presence of God. David Diachis writes, "This is a fascinating symbol of the consequences of Moses' increasing communion with the divine. His lonely mystic visions, while not impairing his leadership, was increasingly setting him apart from the people." Once again, there was a translation error. The Hebrew word for radiant was recorded as horn. During the Middle Ages, when the Bible was translated into Latin, when famous Italian painter and sculptor Michelangelo carved a massive marble statue of Moses in the 16th century, he included two stubby horns on top of Moses' head. This translation error even led some people to believe that all Jews looked this way. Kirsch writes, "My junior high journalism teacher, a Jewish man who served in World War II, recalled that he woke up one night in the barracks to find a fellow draftee, a man from the rural South, kneeling by his bunk and staring at the top of his head. 'I've never met a Jew before,' the soldier explained, 'and I wanted to see your horns.' When they had been given the laws, the assurance that they were the chosen people of God, it was time to move on. The promised land lay not far away. The Israelites built a container for the stone tablets on which the commandments were engraved, the Ark of the Covenant, and set out from Mount Sinai. They appeared to be well organized and well armed, ready to defeat any force that might oppose them. Hopes were high. They thought their days of hardship in the desert were over. They thought wrong." And this is where we stop here. So I'd like to help you to go to the FYI for your information and read about all the things about the rest of the 613, if you like, commandments. So this is page 31. So we'll continue next week. So thank you very much. I'm still looking forward to having kind of a dialogue. So send your responses, especially of the classwork, so that I can dialogue with you and help you better understand this text. Okay? So thank you. Be safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you again next week.